This book, I think, goes into, in philosophy, you would call it sort of epistemic humility. Okay, it's a fancy way of saying that we've been wrong a lot, actually. We were wrong about countless COVID-19 policies or about the media's censorship of the idea that COVID-19 originated in a lab in China, when in fact it did, though you were dismissed as a racist and a xenophobe for saying so at the time. We were wrong about the systematic suppression the media was of the Hunter Biden laptop story on the eve of the 2020 presidential election. And there's a lot else we're probably wrong about right now, too. But if we don't learn from those mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them.
We are talking about truths, the future of America first. So you just laid out a little bit of what the premise is. Basically, how do we get to a positive vision is part of the problem of getting to a positive vision, what we discussed in the earlier part of this, which is that the media in some ways won't let us get to a more positive vision because their incentive structure is to keep us all crazed and angry.
Absolutely it is. And I think that I'm a big fan, and I try to do this as much as I can in different points in this book. I'm a fan of getting the best possible arguments for the other side on the table. Mm-hmm. I think that oftentimes most arguments offered for the other side are actually poor arguments, but I'm actually interested in what's the best possible articulation for, in this case, why the media is even behaving the way they do. So early on in the book, let's just get it on the table. I actually quote NPR's CEO, so the CEO of National Public Radio, who at least had something interesting to say. You could say you disagree with it or not. I do disagree with it, but at least let's just get it on the table. Where the argument she makes is that actually our focus, and I think she calls it our obsession over the truth or what is true, can distract us from doing what is actually important, which is bringing people together, is what she calls it. So I think it's interesting. I think it's honest, at least, because it accounts for a lot of the behaviors where you can imagine there's 2 points of engaging in investigative journalism or in open discourse or debate. One purpose is that you're seeking the truth, that the path to truth runs through free speech and open debate and open inquiry. That's the American way. But you could also say, no, there's a different objective to conversation. There's different objectives to the portrayal of information that may not actually have to do with the truth, but may have to do with achieving other worthy objectives. And at least I think that that's a debate then you're able to have, right? Mm-hmm. And I respect her for saying it, even though I deeply disagree with her, because at least it was in some sense an honest portrayal of what's actually going on. The assault on truth isn't really a left-wing accident. It is part of the project because sometimes the truth can be very uncomfortable. And the truth can actually come in the way of the objective of human harmony that the best of the left might want to see actualized in the world. And they say, hey, the truth becomes inconvenient and gets in the way. Well, that answers the question of what do we as conservatives stand for? I think the next step is we in the conservative movement, what do we stand for? We stand for truth. And that was the whole premise of the book. And the chapters are modeled on some of the things I said during my campaign. But truths like the idea that God is real, that the climate change agenda is a hoax, that reverse racism is racism, that an open border is not a border, that there are 2 genders, that parents should be the one determining the education of their children, that the nuclear family isn't a bad word. It's the greatest form of governance known to mankind, that there's 3 branches of government in the United States of America, not 4, that the U.S. Constitution is the strongest and greatest guarantor of freedom known in human history, that there's facts that are separate from conspiracies and facts are not conspiracies. Nationalism need not be a bad word. So these are the kinds of themes that I unpack in the book where had I said them 30 years ago, I'd advise you not to buy the book because they would be so banal that you would have no reason to waste your money on this. And the warning I would give people now is a lot of what you're about to read in this book can be so controversial that you may take real economic or personal or social risk if you repeat much of what this book has to say. But I do think that's how we get our country back. And it's why I was keen on making sure that I'm speaking through this book, not just to conservatives, but to independent-minded Americans across the country. And I hope we have a real impact.
In some respects, what I'm hearing you say is that there's a certain portion of people that it's not exactly the lying that's kind of their driving force, but it's that the ends justify the means, right?
Yeah.
That really is, they will in essence do whatever they have to do. Thus, they don't mind repeating the lies over and over because I would suppose it's in their minds for the greater good, et cetera. Is the problem that we have, is the problem that we have right now, though, that if you take the ends justify the means versus the truth, and I think you would agree that the truth will always win in a fair fight, but now we are in an algorithmically charged world where perhaps that fight, or almost certainly that fight, is not equal. And that's why we seem to continue this descent into hell.
Yeah, I think the algorithmification of it is an even greater challenge. I like to say, it's an old expression from a friend, is the truth is like a lion. You can only hold it back for so long. And I think that's a timeless principle. But the question is how long, right?
Right.
And how long relative to human lifespan. So it might take decades in some cases now to recover truths that were suppressed for a long time. I do think the truth is like a lion. It eventually comes out, but it can be pretty painful, even if it's outside the scope of your own lifespan, which we've seen for, even a lot of the truths we've learned about things that have happened over the course of the last 70 years in the country haven't always been pretty. But we have to keep that in mind then in staying skeptical of what we're force fed in the present, because, as Mark Twain says, it's what you don't know that just ain't. It's what that you think you do know that just ain't so. And so this book, I think, goes into, in philosophy, you would call it sort of epistemic humility. Okay, that's a fancy way of saying that we've been wrong a lot. Actually, we were wrong about countless COVID-19 policies, or about the media's censorship of the idea that COVID-19 originated in a lab in China, when in fact it did, though you were dismissed as a racist and a xenophobe for saying so at the time. We were wrong about the systematic suppression the media was of the Hunter Biden laptop story on the eve of the 2020 presidential election. And there's a lot else we're probably wrong about right now, too. But if we don't learn from those mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them. And part of the way we're going to get there is through unvarnished free speech and open debate. And the way this debate about the pursuit of truth manifests itself is in your commitment to unfettered free speech versus censorship. And I think that is one of the defining issues of our time. It's a core issue for me. I am a free speech absolutist, both legally, but also in terms of our own culture in the United States. I think there are legal ways that institutions can restrain speech that still are just not good for the United States, and I think are still anti-American at their cultural core. And this book makes, I hope, a persuasive case, even to committed liberals, that is still the last best hope we have for the pursuit of truth, is unfettered free speech and open debate in the country at a time where that used to be a liberal value, maybe no longer is today. But you got Pavel Durov being arrested in France for operating Telegram. You got Brazil banning X. I think that I don't want to see the United States follow a similar path. And yet that's exactly where we risk heading unless we course correct. And this book documents and goes through a lot of the areas where some of the most obvious statements, even in my chapter about the fact that there are two genders, there's a lot that's been said about the trans debate, about men competing with women in women's sports, and about the affronts of men and women, or boys and girls, being forced to share the same locker rooms in high schools. But one of the hard truths is actually people are hurt as a consequence. When you look at the spike, it's like a 238% increase in the number of inmates who are now signing up and claiming to be women, when in fact they're biological men. That's directly correlated with the rise in sexual assaults in all female prison inmate environments. And it's not that, as the people who may view the truth as an inconvenience, to borrow from the NPR CEO's quote at the start of the book, they may say that, I'm going to paint a narrative around that. The narrative is all of the transphobia in the country is resulting in police targeting transphobic transgender people more, right, which is why we're seeing a spike in transgenders among the inmate population, or that they're actually maybe they are committing more crimes, but it's because they're forced to choose a life of crime because they've been so castigated and vilified by society. Turns out we go through the facts on this. It's none of those things. It's actually just the fact that you've created an incentive structure where women's prisons are a much more attractive place to spend time for male criminals. They tend to be a little bit more peaceful. They tend to be more relaxed. They tend to have less confinement time. They tend to have less restraints. And the sad truth is there's a lot more vulnerable women to rape. And the reality is that's exactly what's happening. And yet a lot of these male criminals are taking advantage of it. And here we call this a victory for trans rights. Those are hard truths backed up by fact. And so that's one of the things I try to do in this book is stay as tethered to stone cold hard facts as we can. And, even in the chapter about God is real, which is an interesting debate doesn't feel super timely right now. It's in some ways a timeless debate. It's been with us for all of human history. I try to air a lot of the best arguments from some of the atheists who I respect most, the Richard Dawkinses or the Sam Harrises, who have offered interesting, at least, arguments against the existence of God, to air that and to prove even in those difficult areas, the way we're actually going to get to truth is actually through more free speech and open debate on the best of those arguments. And so that's one of the goals with the book. And I hope people are able to, get not an academic exposition out of it, but some very practical pointers to be able to talk to friends or family members who you might not have been able to talk to or felt comfortable talking to in a really long time because you think it's going to create distance between you to talk politics or culture. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think that I'm trying through this book to arm people with a toolkit that's tied to facts, but without being contentious for its own sake.
Yeah, as I'm sure you know, I don't know if it's in the book, but, Richard Dawkins has just recently come out and said, even as an atheist, he's very happy to be living in a Christian country. That kind of tells you perhaps all you need to know on that. We only have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to, you mentioned climate change for a moment, and I've found that as now it's become easier for all of us to talk about the woke stuff, the gender stuff, the race stuff, like we can joke about it more. It seems like we've really got some wins, at least culturally, on that side. Climate change still seems to me to be the one that they'll come after you the most for, at least at the moment. And of course, that always changes. How did you tackle that with knowing that that's the case?
So you got to operate on very rigorous standards here to make sure you're not
letting
yourself
perhaps
to even a foot fault. Because the standards that are applied to different sides of this debate are uneven standards, but that is knowing that reality going in, we can deal with that. So my own view on this is let's just separate the different questions at issue. Are global surface temperatures going up? Empirically, it appears to be the case. It's interesting that 4 or 5 years straight of global surface temperature declines where people didn't really talk about it as much. But all in all, if you look at the last 50 years, are global surface temperatures going up? Yes. Is that potentially related to man-made causes? I think there could be some evidence to suggest that it is. But I separate all of that from the question that nobody's asking, but we should be asking, which is that necessarily even a bad thing for humanity? Mm-hmm. And then we go through just like looking at any trend. Are there positives and are there negatives? And then are we sure that the net positive effect doesn't actually outweigh the net negative effect, which is different than the way this debate is usually framed as a form of climate denialism versus not. And so I can resort where I can to hard facts. 8 times as many people are dying today of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. I explained that in the book. Another fact that I build upon in the book is that the Earth is actually more covered by green surface area today than it was a century ago.
Yes.
Because plants grow in warmer temperatures and carbon dioxide is plant food. So the carbon emissions that supposedly are warming the planet are also creating more greenery, which absorbs carbon dioxide. It's the greatest form of carbon capture we have is forestation. You look at actually back to the 1970s. Let's just trace the intellectual history. Climate alarmists in the 70s who called for abandonment of fossil fuels, they were worried about an ice age, not about global warming, because more people have died over history over ice ages rather than from warming. And so against that backdrop, are we to abandon the modern way of life of the way people in the West and the United States live over a slight increase in temperatures when in fact it was cold temperatures, ice ages, and cold-related deaths that actually pose a greater threat to human lifespans and human prosperity, which is a different framing than the way this question has historically been framed. But then I really stick to stone cold hard facts, including citing from Steve Koonin, who was a physicist in the Obama Energy Department, who wrote a book himself entitled Unsettled. And, this book spans so many different topics, right? From the existence of God to the climate change religion, to reverse racism, to the nationalism not being a bad word, to the importance of the U.S. constitutional values, to the nuclear family and what that means for pro-family policy in the United States. It's a wide range. And so one of the things I try to do even in this chapter on climate change is I'm not offering my own theses or facts. I'm offering facts that are the product of people who have made each of these subjects their life's work, but threading them together at least in a way that allows everyday Americans who thankfully are not like you and I obsessed over these questions on a day-to-day basis, but are hardworking people with their own jobs and lives, taking care of their own families, but whose lives are affected by boneheaded policies based on this climate religion, to be able to distill those facts that are really, inherited from people who have made this their life's work, but to be able to channel that to everyday dinner table debates and hopefully channel that to rethink some of their premises that might change their own behaviors, not just how they vote, but how free they actually feel to speak up rather than to be shouted down into submission. And so I have to admit, if you told me for my first book that I would write a book where at the end of every chapter we offer 5 hard truths and we just lay out in the summary, here are actually 5 hard facts that you learned in this chapter, I would have said, oh no, I would never write a book like that. Actually, this is my 4th book in 4 years. And I think that this will end up being my most important book, that I think it's going to actually impact more people than adopting more of an academic air as I did in several of my other books. And so I'd like to say that I think the thought that went into this is every bit the same as the other books, but I tried to make it far more accessible in punchlines that people are able to use in their everyday lives and conversations.
Let me ask you one other thing, and then next time maybe we can do this either in studio, or if it's up to you, it'll be on the tennis court. If it's up to me, it'll be on the basketball court. Maybe we can do some kind of like a little of everything. We'll see what we can work out next time you're in Florida. But my last question to you, as long as we're talking about truth, and that's what the book's about. If Donald Trump wins and Donald Trump comes to you and says, hey, I'd like you to help the best way you can. I want to get some truth out there. What does that look like to you? I know in some ways it's probably the most annoying question for you.
It's not annoying. It's just at all. It's just that I've always found, Dave, is like when I'm making my own individual life plans one step at a time, it never goes according to that plan anyway. Right. But when you're honestly called by your own sense of purpose, the plan tends to reveal itself. And so I'm betting on the latter this time around. I mean, the election's far from a foregone conclusion. We've got 50 days to a contested election. We've got 2 assassination attempts in the last 3 months. My focus is on making sure that Donald Trump and the Republican Party and hopefully all Americans are able to safely get through this election in a successful way that revives our country. And then I'm going to do whatever has the biggest possible impact. Obviously, people are speculating. I'm from Ohio, whether it's taking J.D. Vance's Senate seat that'll remain vacant, to running for governor in Ohio, which is frankly what most people in this state are pushing me to do, to the conversations that Donald Trump and I have had over the course of this year about some pretty high impact roles in the administration. I'll leave it at that. We'll let that path declare itself shortly after the election. In some ways, it's actually kind of liberating for me. What happens in the election is out of my control. It's out of your control. And so the best we can do is to just have as much of an impact as we can in the present. And so I've enjoyed doing some things in the private sector this year that I hope are productive and going to have positive impact on people. And that's a discussion for another day. But one of those things I tried to do this year was to spend some time with some honest reflection on a campaign that was a whirlwind and, an experience that you really can't derive the learnings you get from running a presidential campaign without actually just doing it. And one of the things I tried to do with this book is even to just give myself the space to reflect on that year. It was a life-changing year, to share that with people who, are curious on lifting the curtain of what that process looks like, but also to aid Americans through the process that I went through in speaking hard truths, to do it in an unvarnished way that's unafraid, to give people that toolkit. That's what I aim to do in this book. And I'm putting it out before the election because I think it still could have a positive impact in our country that hopefully can change things for the better. So I'd encourage everybody to read the book. Books aren't a great way to make great money. That's not a big financial endeavor for me. And I've generated my wealth through building businesses. But I think for the purpose of the book, the reason I'm encouraging people to buy it, and I would be grateful if you actually read the book, is it's a way to open up conversations that we're not having in this country. And I hope every person who reads it is armed with hard, cold facts on some of the most contentious issues of our day, to bring along not just the people who agree with us, but actually a lot of the people who don't, but who'll be able to, hopefully driven by facts and cold-hearted, rational arguments, able to be given permission to agree with a Republican or a conservative in an environment where that might otherwise be a taboo. That's what I hope this book accomplishes.
Well, let's generate you a little revenue too. The link for Truths, The Future of America First, is right down below. So click that and check out some truths. Vivek, good seeing you, my friend. And maybe we do this right before the election. That way I can push you on these predictions a little bit more.
Yeah, why not? Let's do it. Take care, man.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.